On a crisp autumn morning, the sunlight poured through the windows of Rebecca's house, gently awakening her from a peaceful sleep. The familiar scent of fresh coffee wafted from the kitchen, and the quiet hum of the suburban neighborhood outside signaled the start of another normal day. She stretched her arms above her head, the weight of her soft sheets enveloping her like a warm embrace. For a moment, everything felt as it should, calm, predictable, comfortable. She glanced at her phone, noting that it was already past 8 a.m., and quickly rushed to get dressed for the day ahead. Her partner, Ben, was already up. His routine hadn't changed in the 6 years they'd been together. Ben had always been the early riser, the one who made sure the car was warmed up for her on cold mornings and greeted her with a kiss before she left for work. They had what seemed to be a perfect life, or so she thought. Their relationship had its share of ups and downs, as any long-term partnership does, but they had weathered it all. They had bought their house together, built a life, and even adopted their beloved dog, Daisy, who had quickly become the heart of their home. She loved Daisy with all her heart, and the little dog reciprocated that love in spades. Their bond was undeniable, and she often felt that Daisy could sense her every emotion. But on that particular morning, something was different. Rebecca couldn't quite put her finger on it. She shook off the feeling as nothing more than the usual pre-work anxiety and finished getting ready. She stepped into the kitchen, where Ben was flipping through the morning news on his tablet. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he smiled, his eyes momentarily flicking toward her before returning to the screen. It was a typical exchange, one that had become routine over the years. She smiled back, trying to shake the odd feeling nagging at her. "Morning," she replied. "Did you get the report ready for work?" "Yeah," Ben answered absently, still focused on his tablet. "I'll email it when I get to the office." Rebecca noticed that he didn't make much eye contact today. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The lack of connection in his gaze left a lingering, unsettling feeling in her stomach. Still, she didn't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. The day was just beginning, and she had work to focus on. "All right, I'll be back in a few hours." "You know the routine," she said as she grabbed her bag. Ben gave a small nod without looking up, and Rebecca couldn't help but wonder why she felt so distant from him all of a sudden. But before she could analyze it further, Daisy's bark broke her thoughts, and she turned to see the little dog wagging her tail excitedly, as if trying to push her out the door. Rebecca leaned down to give Daisy a quick scratch behind the ears. "You take care of him, all right?" she whispered, laughing softly. Daisy responded by licking her face and wagging her tail harder, as if understanding that today would be a little different. With one last glance at Ben, who was still absorbed in his tablet, Rebecca walked out the door, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that clung to her. The neighborhood was quiet as usual, the streets lined with trees just starting to lose their leaves. Daisy trotted happily beside her as they made their way to the car, seemingly oblivious to the strange tension hanging in the air. At work, Rebecca threw herself into her tasks. The office was a typical corporate environment, bustling with energy as everyone rushed to meet deadlines and juggle multiple projects. Her colleagues greeted her with smiles and small talk, but her mind kept wandering back to that odd interaction with Ben that morning. She couldn't help but feel that something was off, something that didn't add up. Was it just her imagination, or had Ben been distant lately? He had always been affectionate, attentive, but now, it felt like he was slipping away, retreating into his own world. Daisy, however, was always there when she came home. The dog's wagging tail was a comfort, and Rebecca found herself pouring her heart into Daisy's presence. It wasn't that she didn't love Ben, she did, deeply. But lately, the warmth she had once felt from him seemed to be fading. She tried to ignore the whispers of doubt in her head, brushing them off as mere insecurities. Relationships went through phases, right? Maybe this was just one of those phases. That evening, Ben came home late, a little later than usual. She was already settled on the couch, with Daisy curled up beside her, when the door opened. Ben stepped in, his briefcase in hand, and immediately kicked off his shoes, clearly exhausted. He didn't acknowledge her right away, as he usually did. Instead, he moved toward the kitchen, his focus entirely on preparing dinner. "Everything all right?" Rebecca asked, her voice tentative. Ben froze for a moment before turning to face her. "Yeah, everything's fine." He gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Rebecca felt that familiar sense of unease. She watched him closely, trying to make sense of the situation. Ben had always been an open book when it came to his emotions. But now, there was a wall between them, one that had gradually risen, unnoticed by Rebecca until it had already reached the ceiling. "Is there anything you want to talk about?" she asked again, hoping he would open up. He set his plate down in front of her and sighed. "I don't know what you want me to say, Rebecca. I'm tired. Work's been crazy, and it's a lot." She could hear the frustration in his voice, but there was something else, something underlying. It was as though he was shutting her out without even realizing it. Rebecca's gut instinct screamed that something wasn't right. Her heart tightened with worry, but she pushed the feeling aside. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe it was nothing. After dinner, they settled into their usual evening routine, but it was different. The silence between them was thick. When they went to bed that night, Ben lay with his back to her, his breathing steady, but the space between them felt vast, like an ocean that could not be crossed. Daisy, as usual, nestled herself between them, as if sensing the tension, but even her warmth didn't seem to provide any comfort. Rebecca tossed and turned, her mind racing. She couldn't explain why, but something about Ben's behavior was bothering her more and more. She tried to convince herself that it was just stress, or perhaps the fatigue of the day wearing her down. But deep down, she felt like she was missing something important, something that Ben wasn't telling her. The next day, Rebecca was up early again, but this time, the feeling of unease followed her more persistently. As she stood at the kitchen counter, making her coffee, Daisy began to bark uncontrollably, her tail wagging frantically as she ran to the door. Rebecca, startled, looked down at her dog. "What's going on, girl?" Rebecca muttered, confused. Daisy never acted like this unless something unusual was happening. But when Rebecca opened the door to see what Daisy was reacting to, she saw nothing, just the quiet suburban street, the same as it always was. Daisy, however, was still on high alert, her eyes fixed on a house down the street, her body tense and focused. Rebecca frowned. It was the house of one of Ben's co-workers, a woman he'd mentioned casually a few times before. As Rebecca watched Daisy bark and pull toward the house, a sense of dread filled her chest. Daisy, usually so calm and loyal, seemed unnerved. Was she reacting to someone or something at that house? Rebecca couldn't help but wonder if Daisy knew something that she didn't. Something that Ben wasn't telling her. The day passed in a blur. At work, Rebecca's thoughts kept drifting back to that house and to Daisy's strange behavior. By the time she arrived home, it was late, and Ben was already there. He didn't greet her the way he normally did. In fact, he barely acknowledged her presence as he stepped past her, his phone glued to his hand. "Ben?" Rebecca called after him, but he didn't respond immediately. When he did turn around, it was with an expression that was completely unfamiliar to her. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, perhaps? He quickly brushed it off and muttered something about being tired before retreating to the bedroom. Rebecca stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, wondering what in the world was going on. Daisy's barking, Ben's strange behavior, and that sense of dread building in her chest were all pushing her toward one undeniable truth: something was wrong. But what? Rebecca couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had crept up on her. That night, she barely slept, tossing and turning as the thoughts swirled in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the distance growing between her and Ben, widening like an endless chasm. His sudden detachment, Daisy's unusual behavior, and the unsettling sense that something was wrong gnawed at her. When morning came, she felt more exhausted than the night before, as if the weight of the unknown had seeped into her bones. She made her way through her morning routine mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. The steady rhythm of her actions felt almost robotic. The coffee brewed, the toast popped, and Daisy greeted her with her usual exuberance, but none of it seemed to alleviate the heaviness in her chest. Ben was already up, though he was quieter than usual. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, his face lit by the soft glow of the screen. She watched him for a moment, the silence between them more pronounced than it had ever been before. The same man who used to smile at her over his coffee, ask about her day, and laugh at her jokes now seemed like a stranger. "Ben, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaking slightly with the weight of the words. He glanced up at her for a moment, then dropped his gaze back to his phone. "Not now, Beck. I'm busy." The casual dismissal of her attempt to connect sent a jolt of frustration through her. She could feel the anger rising, mingling with the hurt. For weeks, she had been trying to reach him, to understand what was happening, but he kept shutting her out, and the walls he had built between them felt like they were closing in. "I'm not going to let this go," she said, her voice more firm now. "You've been distant, Ben. Something's going on, and I need to know what it is." He sighed heavily, clearly irritated, before finally putting his phone down. "Rebecca, it's just work. I'm tired. You know how things have been." But there was something in his tone, something that made her skin crawl, like he was hiding more than just stress from work. His words didn't match his expression, and the guilt in his eyes was too apparent to ignore. "I know you're hiding something," she pressed, her heart pounding. "I can feel it. You can't keep pushing me away." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I said, not now, okay? I don't want to talk about it." Rebecca watched him storm off, the door slamming behind him as he left for work. She stood frozen, the silence that followed swallowing her whole. Daisy came over, nuzzling her legs as if offering comfort, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. She knew Ben had been hiding something, but the question now was, what was it? The pit in her stomach only deepened, and the nagging sense of impending doom grew stronger with each passing minute. As the day went on, Rebecca tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting back to Ben's strange behavior. She thought about Daisy's bizarre reaction the previous day, the way the dog had barked at the house down the street, the same house that Ben had mentioned so casually. It was hard not to feel like everything was connected, like the pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. By the time she finished work, Rebecca was more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this. She couldn't keep living in the dark, not when the truth was just out of reach. As she drove home, her mind raced with possibilities, but none of them felt right. Could Ben be having an affair? Was he hiding something more serious? Or was it something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with her at all? When she arrived home, Daisy was waiting at the door, wagging her tail with her usual enthusiasm. But there was something different about Daisy's energy today. The dog's eyes were wide, almost frantic, and she darted around the house as if searching for something. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat, her nerves on edge as she closed the door behind her. "Daisy, what is it?" she whispered, kneeling down to calm the dog. But before she could even process what was happening, the phone rang. Rebecca picked it up without thinking. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a woman's voice, calm but with an edge of urgency. "Is this Rebecca?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Lisa, and I think you need to hear this. It's about Ben." Rebecca's heart stopped, her blood running cold as the world seemed to pause. Her grip tightened on the phone. "What about him?" There was a long pause on the other end, as if Lisa was debating whether to continue. Finally, she spoke. "You need to come to my house. Ben's been seeing someone else, and I think you deserve to know." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything she had feared was now a reality, but she couldn't process it. The phone trembled in her hand as she tried to gather herself. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm the woman Ben's been seeing," Lisa replied, her voice sharp but not without a hint of sympathy. "I didn't want to do this, but I think you deserve to know the truth." Rebecca was speechless. She hung up the phone slowly, her fingers numb. Her mind was spinning, but one thing was certain: everything she thought she knew about her life, about Ben, was a lie. The man she had trusted, the man she had built a future with, had been living a double life. She felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling, and the world as she knew it was slipping away. Her eyes darted toward the window, where the familiar suburban streets outside suddenly felt alien. This wasn't just about Ben anymore. This was about her life, her future, and the secrets that had been hidden for far too long. Rebecca knew she couldn't keep ignoring the truth. She had to confront Ben, to hear it from him directly. But she also knew that this moment, this confrontation, would change everything. There would be no going back once the truth was out. And the weight of that truth was enough to make her knees buckle. Daisy's frantic barking broke her from her thoughts once again, and Rebecca stood, her legs unsteady. She walked toward the door, each step heavy with the burden of what she now knew. As she opened the door, she glanced one last time at Daisy, whose eyes seemed to be pleading with her to listen. But no matter how much Rebecca wanted to deny it, the truth was already here. The only question left was how she would handle it. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to find Ben, to demand answers. As she stepped out into the evening air, the chill biting at her skin, the dog beside her seemed to understand. Daisy's tail wagged once more, but this time it was with a sense of urgency, as if she knew that this was the moment that everything would change. The air around her felt thick with tension, and for the first time in a long while, Rebecca felt the weight of her own emotions pressing against her chest, threatening to suffocate her. She had no idea what to expect from Ben when they came face to face, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't back down. The truth would come to light, whether Ben liked it or not. Rebecca drove through the quiet streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Daisy, usually content with sitting quietly in the passenger seat, was restless today. She paced back and forth, her nails clicking against the plastic of the car's interior, a sound that only made the silence between them heavier. The steady rhythm of the tires against the road seemed to mirror Rebecca's heartbeat, slow, but relentless, pulling her forward into something she wasn't sure she was ready for. The house where Lisa had asked her to meet her was just outside the city, in a neighborhood where the houses were spaced far apart, their lawns immaculate, and the air felt a little too still. The tension in Rebecca's chest increased as she neared it, the streetlights flickering against the deepening dusk. She had told herself she wouldn't drive here. She had promised herself she wouldn't seek out the truth until Ben was ready to confess, until he was willing to face her, to talk. But Lisa's words, the calm, matter-of-fact tone in her voice, had shattered that resolve. If Ben wasn't going to tell her, then someone else would, and she couldn't wait any longer. The car slowed as she turned into the driveway, her headlights cutting through the darkness and revealing a two-story home that seemed too perfect, too polished. It was nothing like the house Rebecca had shared with Ben. This house felt impersonal, as though it was meant to impress more than to live in. A sense of foreboding washed over her as she turned off the engine. Daisy, sensing the shift in energy, stopped pacing and sat down, her ears perked up. Rebecca took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting her like a shock to her system. She stood there for a moment, staring at the house, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. The confrontation. The truth was waiting for her inside, and no matter how much she wanted to turn back, she couldn't. There was no more running, no more pretending. She walked up to the front door, her steps measured, but her mind was racing. Her thoughts were a blur of questions. What had she missed? What had Ben said, done, or hidden that had led her to this moment? She had always trusted him, loved him, and now it felt like she was standing at the edge of an abyss, looking down into a darkness she hadn't even known existed. The door opened before she could knock, and Lisa stood there, her face a mixture of sympathy and resolve. The woman was younger than Rebecca, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair and sharp features that softened when she saw Rebecca. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither of them speaking. It was as though they were both measuring one another, trying to figure out what role they would each play in this terrible story. "Rebecca," Lisa said finally, her voice gentle but with an edge that hinted at the tension of the situation. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be hard, but you deserve to know the truth." Rebecca nodded, though the lump in her throat made it hard to speak. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Lisa opened the door wider, stepping aside to let Rebecca in. "I've been trying to convince myself to stay out of this. But I can't. You have to know. Ben's been seeing me for months. And I think he's been lying to both of us." The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the gut. Her heart raced, the anger building inside her like a tidal wave. She followed Lisa into the living room, her eyes scanning the space as she tried to keep herself composed. The house was too clean, too perfect, and it made her stomach churn. This was the place Ben had been coming to, the place he had chosen over their own home, over the life they had built together. Lisa gestured to the couch, and Rebecca sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Daisy, ever loyal, sat beside her, her body stiff as though she too understood the gravity of the situation. "I know this is hard to process," Lisa continued, sitting down across from Rebecca. "But you need to know that Ben's been telling me he's unhappy, that things aren't working out between the two of you." Rebecca clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I knew it," she muttered under her breath. "I knew something was wrong." Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting away before meeting Rebecca's gaze again. "Ben's a complicated person. He's always been charming, always been able to make you feel like the center of his world. But he's got his own demons, and sometimes, I think he doesn't even know who he really is." Rebecca swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. "How could he do this to me? To us? We've been together for years. He promised me he loved me." "I'm sorry," Lisa said, her voice soft but firm. "I never meant to hurt you. But I couldn't keep pretending that what he and I had wasn't real. It was more than just a fling. I think he's been lying to both of us. And now, I don't know where to go from here." Rebecca took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm despite the firestorm raging inside her. The image of Ben, the man she thought she knew, crumbled in her mind, replaced by the image of a liar, a cheater, someone who had never really been hers. She had loved him with everything she had, and now it felt like that love was a lie. "But why me?" Rebecca's voice trembled. "Why did he even marry me if he didn't love me? Why did we have Daisy, build a life, a home, together if he was just going to throw it all away?" "I don't have the answers," Lisa said quietly, her gaze filled with pity. "But I think you deserve the truth. Ben needs to face what he's done. And you deserve to make the choice to stay or leave, not live in the dark." Rebecca nodded slowly, her mind working through everything Lisa had said. She had suspected something for months, but hearing it all laid out in front of her felt like a slap in the face. The life she thought she had was nothing but a facade. And now, the question was, what would she do next? "Where is he?" Rebecca asked, her voice cold now, steely with determination. "I need to talk to him. I need him to explain all of this. Face me for once, after everything he's done. Lisa looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation that was about to unfold. He's at work right now, but I'm sure he'll be home soon. You can confront him then. Rebecca stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to know the truth, even if it shattered her world. And Ben? He would have to answer for everything. As she turned to leave, Daisy followed closely behind her, her tail wagging uncertainly. Rebecca didn't look back as she stepped out of the house and into the cold night air, a sense of finality settling over her. The next time she saw Ben, it would be a confrontation. No more lies, no more excuses. It was time to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Rebecca's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, the car's engine humming softly beneath her. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion, and betrayal. She had just confronted Lisa, heard the words she had been dreading, and now she was driving back to the place where it had all started, the place where Ben had made promises, where they had built a life together. It was as though her entire world had tilted on its axis, and nothing felt real anymore. Daisy sat quietly in the passenger seat, sensing her owner's turmoil, her eyes watching Rebecca with a deep, knowing stare. The streets blurred by, the streetlights casting long shadows on the road. Rebecca wasn't sure how long she had been driving, or where exactly she was headed. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the confrontation that awaited her. Ben had to face what he had done. He had to face her. When she pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, unchanged, unmoved by the storm that had just rocked her life. The porch light cast a warm glow against the cold night, and the familiar sound of Daisy's collar jingling as she leapt out of the car broke the silence. It was so painfully normal, so ordinary, and yet everything had shifted. Rebecca stood frozen for a moment, looking at the house as if it were a stranger's home, not the place where she had spent the last several years of her life. She could hear Ben inside, the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floors. She knew he was expecting her, and yet, she wasn't sure she was ready. But there was no turning back now. No more waiting, no more pretending. She had the truth, and she needed to make him face it. Daisy trotted ahead as Rebecca walked up the porch steps and stood at the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The doorbell felt like an eternity before it rang, echoing in the night. She waited, the seconds dragging on, before she heard his footsteps approaching. The door opened slowly, and Ben stood there, his familiar face both comforting and foreign at the same time. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, his eyes flicking nervously from her to the dog at her side. "Rebecca," he began, but his voice trailed off, uncertainty seeping into the air. He had been expecting this, she could tell. The tension between them was thick, palpable, and he knew exactly why she was there. He had always been good at reading her, understanding when things weren't right, and now he could feel the weight of everything she had discovered. Rebecca didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just stepped inside, Daisy following obediently behind her. She could feel Ben's eyes on her, watching her every movement, waiting for her to say something. But she was silent, trying to find the words to explain the rage and heartbreak she felt. The living room felt cold, despite the warmth of the fireplace crackling softly in the corner. The house they had once shared, where laughter had echoed off the walls, where they had dreamed of growing old together, suddenly felt like a stranger's house, a house that had been stained with lies. Rebecca sat down on the couch, and Daisy curled up at her feet, sensing the tension in the air. Ben lingered in the doorway, his body stiff, his hands in his pockets as though he didn't know how to approach her. "I talked to Lisa," Rebecca said finally, her voice low but steady. There was no need for pleasantries, no time for small talk. The words hung in the air like a damning sentence. She looked at Ben, searching his face for any hint of guilt, but his expression was unreadable, closed off. His shoulders tensed, and for a brief moment, Rebecca thought he might deny it, try to talk his way out of it. But he didn't. Instead, his gaze dropped to the floor, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said quietly, his voice strained. Rebecca clenched her fists, the hurt and betrayal rising in her chest like a tidal wave. "How did you want me to find out, Ben? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, and now I find out from her?" She shook her head, the disbelief in her voice thick. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Ben didn't answer at first, his silence only adding to her anger. His gaze flickered between her and the floor, as though he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I never meant to hurt you, Rebecca. I swear I didn't. It just happened. It wasn't planned." "Not planned?" Rebecca repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "You don't just fall into something like this. You made a choice, Ben. You made the choice to lie to me, to hide things from me, to betray me. That's not something that just happens." Ben looked at her then, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, something that Rebecca couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to fix things, and I thought maybe I could find something else, something better." "Better?" The word cut through Rebecca like a blade. She stood up then, the anger in her chest too much to contain. "You thought she was better than me? After everything we've been through? After everything I've done for you?" Ben didn't speak, but his eyes seemed to tell a different story, a story Rebecca didn't want to believe. The silence between them stretched on, unbearable, as the weight of his words settled between them. Rebecca shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't believe this. I gave you everything, Ben. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for some affair. Some lie. I don't even know who you are anymore." The anger in Rebecca's chest burned hotter, but it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could she have been so blind? How could she have trusted him when all along, he had been lying, sneaking around behind her back? "I need to know one thing," Rebecca said, her voice quieter now, but with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Why? Why did you do this? Why did you lie to me?" Ben looked away, his face contorted with emotion, but for a long moment, he didn't say anything. And then, in a voice tinged with regret, he spoke. "I don't know. I thought maybe it would fix things, but it didn't. I thought I could find happiness somewhere else. But now I just feel lost." Rebecca felt her heart shatter. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was admitting that he had sought solace elsewhere, all while she had been waiting, loving him with everything she had. "And what now, Ben?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What happens now?" Ben didn't answer right away, but when he finally looked at her, his eyes were filled with sorrow. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know what's going to happen now. But I'm sorry, Rebecca. I've messed everything up." The words fell between them, heavy and final. But even as Rebecca looked at him, she knew that it was too late. The damage had been done. The trust that had held them together for so many years had been broken, shattered beyond repair. And now, there was nothing left to do but face the consequences of his actions. As she turned and walked towards the door, Daisy following closely behind her, she felt the weight of the decision that lay ahead. It wasn't just about Ben anymore. It was about her, about finding a way to heal, to move forward from the wreckage of the life they had built. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear, there was no turning back. The truth had been revealed, and there was no escaping the fallout. Rebecca sat alone in her car, the engine idling as she stared out the windshield. The streetlights outside blurred together, casting long, wavering shadows on the pavement. She hadn't moved in what felt like hours, still processing everything that had happened. Daisy lay curled up in the passenger seat, her soft breathing a steady reminder that there was still a world beyond the turmoil swirling inside her. But in that moment, all Rebecca could do was think about what came next. Her mind raced through the endless possibilities, each one heavier than the last. The confrontation with Ben had been more than she had expected. His apology had felt hollow, like an afterthought. His regret, though apparent in his eyes, wasn't enough to undo the damage he'd caused. She had spent years building a life with him, pouring herself into their shared dreams, and now it felt like it had all crumbled away. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship had been shattered beyond repair, and she didn't know how, or even if, it was possible to rebuild it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Lisa. Rebecca hadn't replied to her yet, and part of her wasn't sure if she wanted to. But curiosity got the better of her, and she unlocked her phone, opening the message. "I'm sorry for everything, Rebecca. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for things to get so out of hand. I understand if you hate me, but please know that wasn't my intention." Rebecca's fingers hovered over the screen as she read the message over and over, trying to understand it, to make sense of it. Part of her wanted to reach out and ask Lisa what had happened, why she had crossed that line in the first place. The other part of her wanted to slam the phone down and forget the whole situation ever existed. Lisa had betrayed her too, and she wasn't sure how she could even begin to process the fact that a person she had considered a friend had been involved in tearing her life apart. But as she sat there, with her thoughts in turmoil and the weight of everything pressing down on her chest, a realization hit her. This wasn't just about Ben and Lisa. It was about her, about who she was and how she was going to move forward from here. The world had tilted, the ground beneath her feet had shifted, and now, she had to find a way to steady herself again. For herself, and for Daisy, who had been by her side through it all. The decision was clear, even if it wasn't easy. She couldn't stay in that house anymore. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now felt suffocating, heavy with memories that were no longer hers to keep. She needed space, time to think, to process, and to heal. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the realization that she had ignored the signs for so long, had let herself believe in something that was never real. She had trusted Ben, and in doing so, had blinded herself to the truth. With a sigh, Rebecca started the car and drove away from the house. Daisy sat quietly beside her, the dog's comforting presence the only constant in the chaos. The streets were quieter now, the night settling in, and as Rebecca drove, she felt something within her shift. It wasn't the weight of anger or betrayal anymore, it was something else, something she couldn't quite define. The next few days passed in a blur. Rebecca stayed with her sister for a while, trying to clear her head. The house she had shared with Ben was no longer home, it was a place of lost trust, and everything inside it reminded her of the life she thought she had. She started the slow process of packing up her things, though it felt impossible to remove herself from the place she had once dreamed would be the backdrop to her future. But there was no future in that house anymore, not with Ben, not with the lies. As she sifted through her belongings, she found photos, mementos, pieces of her past that she had held on to, thinking they were symbols of love and commitment. But now, they felt like relics of someone else's life. She packed them away, not ready to part with them but not ready to keep them either. It felt like an odd form of closure, as if by putting the physical pieces of her past into boxes, she was somehow also putting away the memories that had once defined her. The days turned into weeks, and though the pain didn't disappear, it became easier to breathe. Rebecca spent more time with Daisy, taking long walks in the park, finding comfort in the simple routines that had once been so mundane. Daisy was her anchor, her constant. The dog had been through it all with her, and Rebecca found solace in the quiet companionship they shared. One evening, as she walked through the park, she received another message from Ben. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate before reading it. I miss you, Rebecca. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I've made a mess of everything, and I can't undo what I've done. But I want to try. If you can find it in your heart to even consider it, I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Rebecca stared at the message, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. He was asking for forgiveness, asking for another chance. But she didn't know if she could give him that. Could she forgive him? Could she go back to the person she was before all of this had happened? She stood still, the cool evening air brushing against her skin as she tried to think. She wanted to believe in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, but part of her felt like the damage was too great. There was no undoing what had been done. The betrayal had cut too deep, and the person she had once trusted with her heart had proved himself unworthy. She glanced down at Daisy, who was trotting happily beside her, tail wagging. It wasn't just about Ben anymore. It was about her own healing, her own path forward. She needed to focus on that, on becoming the person she was before she had allowed herself to believe in lies, before she had ignored the signs of betrayal. She had to find herself again, without Ben, without the weight of his mistakes. With a deep breath, Rebecca typed her response. I'm sorry, Ben. I don't think I can do this anymore. I need to move on, for my own sake. I hope you find what you're looking for, but I can't be a part of it. She sent the message and put her phone away. There was no turning back now. She had made her decision, and as she walked with Daisy into the evening light, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt like she was walking it with her own 2 feet, not burdened by the weight of betrayal or the shadows of someone else's mistakes. And for the first time, she felt free. Rebecca woke up to the soft, steady sound of raindrops tapping against her bedroom window. The gray morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a muted glow across the room. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt an odd sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't the overwhelming relief she had expected after making the decision to walk away from Ben, it was something quieter, something more profound. She was beginning to understand that the life she had thought was hers was never really hers to begin with. Now, in this moment, she had the opportunity to create a new version of herself, free from the shadows of betrayal and loss. Daisy lay curled up at the foot of the bed, her body rising and falling with each breath. The dog had been by her side through every heartbreak, every quiet moment of reflection, and had never once faltered in her loyalty. Rebecca smiled softly, reaching down to stroke Daisy's fur. There was a deep comfort in knowing that, despite everything that had happened, Daisy was still her constant companion. In a world that had felt upside down, Daisy was the one piece that hadn't changed. As Rebecca got out of bed and moved to the kitchen, her phone buzzed on the counter. She knew it was probably another message from Ben. They had been coming in with increasing frequency over the past few days. His messages ranged from apologetic to desperate, and some were even filled with anger. But through it all, Rebecca remained resolute. She had made her decision, and there was no going back now. The words on the screen no longer had the power to break her. She picked up the phone and saw Ben's latest message. I can't stop thinking about you, Rebecca. I know I messed up, but I can't help but feel like we can still fix this. I'm asking for one last chance. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. The temptation to respond, to at least acknowledge the pain in his words, was strong, but she resisted. What would it change? She had already told him everything she needed to say. She had already let go of what was no longer hers. The past was behind her now, and she couldn't allow herself to be dragged back into the web of lies and regret that had been spun so tightly around them. Instead, Rebecca set the phone down and made herself a cup of coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. The silence in the room felt comforting, as if the world outside was still sleeping, allowing her the space to breathe, to exist without the weight of anyone else's expectations. She hadn't realized just how much of herself she had lost in her marriage to Ben until she started reclaiming her own time, her own peace. After finishing her coffee, Rebecca took Daisy for a long walk through the park. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a fresh, cool air that made the world feel clean and new. She watched as Daisy bounded ahead, her tail wagging in the way it always did when she was excited. Rebecca couldn't help but smile at the sight. Daisy's joy was contagious, reminding her that even in the darkest of times, there was always room for hope and renewal. As they walked, Rebecca's thoughts began to drift. The decision to leave Ben hadn't been easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in. What if she was making a mistake? What if she would never find love again? What if she had been wrong to trust her instincts? But the more time she spent in the quiet spaces of her own mind, the more she realized that the hardest part of leaving was not saying goodbye to Ben, it was saying goodbye to the version of herself that had depended on him. The version of herself that had believed in the fairy tale. The version of herself that had thought love alone could fix everything. But love, as she had learned, wasn't enough. Trust, respect, and honesty had to come first. And somewhere along the way, those things had been lost. In the aftermath of the betrayal, Rebecca had found herself facing a truth she had long ignored: she couldn't keep waiting for someone else to change. She had to change for herself. By the time they reached the far end of the park, Rebecca felt a sense of peace settle over her that she hadn't expected. She had left the house, left Ben, left the life that had once seemed so secure and so full of promise. And in doing so, she had found herself again. She wasn't just moving away from him, she was moving toward something else. She was moving toward herself, toward her own healing, toward a future that was entirely her own. That evening, as Rebecca sat on the couch with Daisy curled up beside her, she received another message. This time, it wasn't from Ben. It was from Lisa. "I understand why you can't forgive me, and I respect your decision. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything I did. I never wanted to hurt you. I hope one day you'll be able to look back at our friendship and remember the good parts, not just the bad." Rebecca read the message and felt a pang of something deep inside her, regret, perhaps, or sadness. But it wasn't anger, and it wasn't the sharp sting of betrayal that had burned through her heart in the days after discovering the truth. It was something softer, something quieter. She had loved Lisa like a sister once, and in that moment, she realized that no amount of apology could undo what had happened. But she could forgive her. Not for Lisa's sake, but for her own. She couldn't carry the weight of resentment any longer. It was a burden that only kept her tied to the past, and Rebecca was done with the past. She typed a simple reply. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget, but I do forgive you. I hope you find peace too." Sending the message felt like letting go of one last thread, a small but significant step in her journey toward healing. Rebecca knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, it meant freeing herself from the hold the past had on her. It meant choosing to move forward, no matter how painful or difficult that journey might be. The following days passed slowly, but in a way that felt right. Rebecca had decided to take time for herself, to focus on her own well-being before anything else. She spent her days exploring new hobbies, reading books she had been meaning to get to, and rebuilding her relationships with her family and friends. Slowly but surely, she was rediscovering the woman she had once been, the woman who had been lost somewhere between the demands of life and the expectations of others. As the weeks turned into months, Rebecca found herself becoming stronger, more confident, and more at peace with the decision she had made. There were moments of doubt, of course, but they were fewer and further between. She had made it through the worst of it, and each day brought her closer to the life she had once dreamed of, a life of independence, freedom, and self-respect. And as for Ben? She never heard from him again after that last message. The silence wasn't as painful as she had imagined. In fact, it felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that she had made the right choice. The life she had built with him had been one of illusions, and now, with each passing day, those illusions crumbled further into the past. But what mattered most to Rebecca now was the life she was building for herself. It was a life that didn't require anyone else to define her, a life that was all her own. It was messy, unpredictable, and imperfect, but it was hers. And that was more than enough. With Daisy by her side, Rebecca walked into a new future, one that was uncertain but full of endless possibilities. The past had been painful, yes, but it had also been a teacher. And now, with each new step forward, she was free. Free to be herself. Free to live. Free to heal.